All right, Promineo week one. Our task was to create a war game. It's supposed to be fully automated and basically run through and tell you, who won the war game. I decided to make at least a little bit more manual with a little bit of interactivity. The users can put in their names. So Travis, and then Matt was the one that graded my coding assignment last week. So Matt, we're going to throw down. It'll then load the page and show it, basically saying, showing this kind of little interaction here, this little page for you to be able to use. When the user clicks on the deal button, it will show the cards as they're being they're being compared, and it will increment the player's score based on who won. In this case, Matt had a king and I had a 10, and therefore he won. And then you can continue to do so, and as you can see, the UI will continue to update based on who wins, and at the end, when each player has dealt out their half of the deck totally, it will tell you, hey, congratulations, Matt, you won. Your score was 16, and once you click OK, it will actually reload the page for anyone to start again. The code for that is sitting right over here. This is the HTML. We haven't covered that yet. It's in the next couple of weeks, but I went ahead and just did some. This is the styles, pretty simple stuff. It's not like super complex. I just had some resets in here. So if you wanted to see that, it's on the repo. I actually implemented JavaScript modules in this. Since we started using Node modules, I figured why not? That way I can kind of clean up the class or the code a little bit. This is my class card or my card class. It basically just takes in a suit and a value and then saves those into files. And then I created a getter for the colors so that when I call the card.color, it makes a comparison and then returns red or black based on that. This is the player class. Each player takes in a deck. It takes in a name. And then references to the HTML so that when they increment the value or update their own personal card, it can run through and essentially, or it can use those references to update the HTML from within the class instead of running that function every single time. So that's the war. And the deck class is actually one of my more favorite ones. I created the deck class such that once you created it, it has a default parameter on its one and only property, which is cards, that basically runs a function that creates a JavaScript array of cards, of new cards, and it uses the suits and the values up here to be able to construct that actually. I used a flat map, which is another JavaScript array method that basically just takes in an array of arrays and then it'll return an array that is essentially smashed together into a singular array, which I thought was really useful when I read about it. But that's the default. It can also be passed its own cards parameter, which I do use for the player class. They each have their own deck, and those cards are passed based off of the original deck that gets created. Basically, I cut it in half and send one to one and one to the other. And then it has a shuffle method, which loops through all of the cards that are currently in it. And then uses JavaScript ES6 array destructuring to basically swap the places of all of the cards as it loops through. Well, not all the cards, but two of the cards. So it just kind of like runs through and shuffles them a bit. I did that with math.random and math.floor. Index.js. These are for the purposes of essentially the HTML updating. And then these are placeholders for when I go and ask the player for their input. And then this sets the player text. This creates an instance of the deck with the default parameter of the cards. It then shuffles that deck, and then what I do is I calculate the middle of the deck, and I pass to the first player the first half, and I pass to the second player the second half, and then their name and their the HTML references. I then create a new instance of the war game, and I pass in each player, and then I add an event listener onto the button of click, which runs the run round, which, looking at the war class, run round, what it does is it checks to see if either player has run out of cards. If they have, then I just end the game. End game basically calculates the winning player by using essentially a get method. It's just a method that returns the current player's score, and it checks to see if player's score is higher than player 2's, and if it is, then the current winner is that player, or player 1, and if not, it's player 2. And then it sends out an alert of the winning player's name, and it uses that same method to print out their score as well. And then it reloads the page. If it doesn't end the game, then each player draws a card. It updates the player's cards HTML, and then it uses a object indexing lookup to be able to test the values of each player's cards, and then compares the two, and then I set that to a variable, and then use an if statement to say, hey, if player 1 wins, then increment his score by 1, else, if player 2 wins, increment his score by 2, and if not, if anything else, set it to, or update the ties, which that might actually be a bug. I might have to change this now that I'm thinking about it, because this is only testing for if it's greater than, but it's not hitting if it's equal. So I'll have to see. This is why we test, but we didn't have to cover the ties, so I'm not going to do that. I decided to only run one test in my index.test, and that was to basically check to see that my deck class creates an instance of a deck. So I tested the deck. I expect my deck to be an instance of a deck, and if you go over here to view tests, it passes that instance and prints it. 1 second, I have to figure out how to get it to pop up for me. Thank you. Passes it to this. All right, that should be the whole thing.